Hollywood wasn't the only industry rocked by Angelina Jolie's storm-ridden tragedy. Millions of people worldwide suffered severe emotional scars as a result of it. Through the years, one hurting, quiet question has persisted. How could a fragile soul like that endure a never-ending maelstrom of suffering? One who was apparently born to shatter her. There were times when she thought those wounds would devour her and rip her apart. With a voice that moved people all over the world and a beauty that stopped time, Jolie was once acclaimed as the uncrowned queen of Hollywood's golden age. She was admired as a representation of brilliance, fortitude, grace, and unending compassion. But now that she is 50, her life is a brutal, relentless reality, and it appears like the agony is still holding her back. The public never once caught a glimpse of the quiet chaos beneath the smiles on magazine covers, the elegant speeches, or the stunning red carpet steps. Beneath that glittering curtain of celebrity is a life racked with anonymous losses, silent mental struggles, and emotional scars that never fully healed. You may see firsthand the pain Angelina Jolie has gone through in this video. Unsettling incidents that could really shake you. Remember to hit like if you've ever met or appreciated Angelina Jolie. Your modest act pays homage to a remarkable talent that merits recognition. The storm did not wait for the Hollywood lights to pass for Angelina Jolie. Long before anyone knew her name, it arrived. When the darkness began its silent claim, she was just a year old. Her first heartache came not with memories, but with a deep emptiness that etched itself into her bones. She was born on June 4, 1975 in Los Angeles, into a family of artists. It was the type of wound that was caused by the absence of someone rather than by pain. The quiet encircled her before she could even speak. Little Angelina stayed in the custody of her mother, Marceline Bertrand, and elder brother, James Haven, while her father, the well-known actor Jon Voight, followed his growing fame. Surrounded by attention and cheers, the door did not open. She was never embraced by anyone she knew. Day after day, she waited by the window like a child, longing for a presence that would never come. Once full of aspirations for her own acting career, her mother immediately gave them up to raise her kids in a modest apartment in Los Angeles. Even her tenderness, however, was veiled in grief, a silent pain that lingered in the atmosphere like a mist that no wind could dispel. Later, Angelina added, there was darkness in the house, something unsaid but not sadness. That unsaid sorrow encircled her and buried itself deep within her. There were no sounds of joy or colorful toys during her early years, only prolonged quiet and the silent disintegration of a mother's burden. Angelina recalled her nurturing nature. However, I believe she was also rather depressed. Angelina started to lose her place in the world because she didn't have a father to ground her, and because she was carrying the weight of her mother's suffering. She didn't belong in her own skin, in schools, or in mirrors. She retreated into her thoughts, found it difficult to communicate, and wondered if she was ever really noticed. I have no one with whom to compare myself. She once acknowledged that her emotional wounds persisted. It grew stronger, subtly influencing her relationships, sense of self, and direction as it extended into her adolescence and adulthood. Longing, not anger, was what sowed the first seeds of disobedience and the first glimmer of gloom. Planted in a tiny apartment where a young girl waited for someone who never came back, not out of rage but out of desperation. The world would eventually be enthralled with that girl. But in those precarious beginnings, she was just Angie, perceptive, hurt, and silently breaking. It was a harsh contrast. She gazed blankly at walls while her father posed for photographers. She drowned in absence while he reveled in the acclaim. Realizing that beneath the early bravado and celebrity was a little child still mourning the love that never materialized breaks the heart. She was viewed by the globe as wild, challenging, and provocative. Few, though, stopped to consider why. Her suffering left more than just wounds. It turned to become her identity's blueprint. Her life would be plagued by that unseen wound for decades, ingrained in every courageous role, every act of kindness, and every tear she never shed in public. Perhaps this is the reason her performances are so eerie. She was remembering because she wasn't pretending. Every line is an admission. Every quiet is a memory. Jolie didn't choose to be strong. Life required her to become strong, left her with no choice. However, being older did not make the darkness go away. As she entered puberty, they became thicker, darker, and more crafty. Her adolescence was not characterized by rash outbursts or showy rebellion. They were a desperate, wordless search for any sensation that might let her know she was still alive. She was the wrong kind of different in school, thin with black wrapped spectacles and braces. They stopped touching her and instead just stared at her. Observed but never observed. She discovered a growing sense of loneliness in place of friendships. Instead, there was a growing emptiness. She once said, "I was the kid that people stared at but never spoke to." She started wearing her inner world on the outer, taking on a gothic look and carrying a knife not to intimidate, but to defend the delicate soul within, as the pain of invisibility set in. She requested her mother's okay to move in with her lover when she was just 14 years old. Not because they were rebelling, but because they were desperate for protection, connection, and anything that looked like love. She would say, "I didn't know what was normal. I simply knew that I wanted to stop feeling empty." However, the void merely deepened. At home, she observed her mother wallowing in grief, still broken by a love that never fully recovered. Jolie's sorrow turned into her own, and she retreated even more, engrossed in her own inner turmoil and mental haze that seemed to evade others. She was there yet incomplete, moving through life like a ghost. School disappeared. Her sense of value collapsed, and she used damage to find its silence when the ache got too loud. Not in screams for assistance, but in invisible wounds. "To feel anything, I would injure myself." Anything, she said afterwards. There was something within her, despite the fact that she was on the verge of emotional collapse. Quiet, obstinate, uncompromising, a portion that would not entirely yield. She had not yet given a name to the light that shone somewhere behind the darkness. Years later, the media would describe her as wild and unpredictable, but they failed to recognize the reality. There was no phase to this. It was a matter of survival. It was the remnant of years of being invisible, unwanted, and in danger. She didn't rebel against the world because she was hateful. She believed that the world had already deserted her, so she did it. She once said, "I never felt safe." And the whole tale was contained in that confession. A girl seeking refuge rather than notoriety or resistance, protection from her inner thoughts, the quiet of her house, and the empty space in her chest. And she lived on. As a performer, mother, and campaigner, she carried those invisible wounds with her everywhere she went. Not a single character on screen was made up. It was ghostly form, lived pain, and remembrance. Her adolescence was more than just a difficult time. They served as battlefields. And even though she almost vanished inside of them, she came out of them not only alive but also transformed. With a strength created in darkness, through suffering, and by refusing to let it define her, rather than one that was acquired from praise, her legacy would be that quiet strength. She came out of the empty halls of self-doubt, hesitant, unarmored, and yet silently bleeding from invisible wounds. She never had a glamorous dream of being an actress. There was longing in the legacy. Being the daughter of John Voight, she entered the performing arts not to want fame, but rather to express the pain she was unable to identify, and to temporarily escape her own life by slipping into other people's lives. Angelina Jolie had no desire to become famous. It was pulled to her, to that silent grief in her eyes, to the unadulterated solemnity of an almost indefatigable presence. Her early roles lacked polish and beauty. They were confused, broken women, personas that mirrored her own broken soul. Movies such as Girl Interrupted and Gia did more than simply introduce a newbie. They revealed a burning spirit that wavered between hope and despair. When she played the tragic supermodel, Gia Karangi in 1998, there was no performance on film. It encapsulated memory. Jolie wasn't trying to look distressed. The world sensed that she was channeling it. The next year, she was interrupted by a female while holding an Oscar. However, she eventually acknowledged that it was just me once more after the lights went down, and she went back to her hotel. It was also very silent. There was no calm in such silence. Beneath the acclaim was the echo of a girl who was still trying to find herself. Hollywood let forth a yell. There were cameras everywhere. However, a woman stood in the middle, wondering whether anyone ever gave her a serious look. The delicate reality she concealed behind the gaze, not the actress or her face. She brought a different type of fire to the screen, not produced or practiced. Her eyes were dangerous, and her silences were sorrowful. She exposed herself while others worked on their positions. Millions were enthralled by that candor, but she was equally exhausted. Like thorn-tangled silk, fame encircled her, stifling and enticing. In her infrequently vulnerable moments, she acknowledged that she never made an effort to be the perfect celebrity. Her words, "I wasn't trying to be anything." The contradiction of her ascent began when she said, "I was just trying to survive." Her loneliness increased as she flew higher. The world praised her bravery. Behind closed doors, however, she recoiled at her own image. That constant conflict between the lady who was loved on stage and the one who was falling apart in solitude became the eerie cadence of her life. Angelina Jolie was still quietly learning how to breathe under the crushing weight of all she had never been able to escape. Even as the world prepared to crown her the new queen of Hollywood, she was swiftly accepted by Hollywood as a formidable, wild, and unforgettable force. However, no round of applause could take away the silent pain that was inside of her. The path to celebrity wasn't a red carpet for Angelina Jolie. In order to temporarily escape herself, she had to forge a route through uncertainty, vulnerability, and the weighty burden of becoming others. Ambition was not acting. It was a haven. It was breath. Acting saved me, she once stated. It enabled me to communicate suffering that I was unable to articulate. That admission was not lyrical. It was a matter of survival. Rejection throughout her early career years was more profound than most people realized. Jolie, the daughter of famous actor Jon Voight, was born into a legacy, yet she found it difficult to fit in. She was rejected by casting directors because she was too intense, too unusual, or too much. She was so disappointed by her first big movie, Cyborg 2 in 1993, that she took a year off from performing. Hollywood still didn't entirely trust Gia. Even after her 1998 Oscar-winning performance in Girl interrupted the following year. She was still viewed as being too unrefined and erratic for the spotlight. She didn't stop, though. She delved further with every part. She became an action icon when Tomb Raider 2001 erupted into the world's attention. Behind the hard days, bruises, and stunts, however, was a lady with invisible wounds. She did the majority of her own stunts, exerting all of her physical strength as her head carried the feelings of each character she played. I sometimes put too much effort into each part. I took their suffering home with me. She openly acknowledged that her signature was her intensity, not because she sparkled, but because she burnt. Audiences were unable to turn away. She combined intensely personal tales with commercial success. She engaged herself in the worldwide humanitarian situation in the 2003 film Beyond Borders. She played a distraught widow in the 2007 film A Mighty Heart with such tragic clarity that while the box office did not hold its breath, reviewers did. She persisted in seeking the truth, not fame. She never felt at ease in the spotlight. It felt fake, strange. Then she said, "It's not genuine. The cameras and lighting conceal more than they show." Jolie talked about feeling alone even when she was at her best. She cried in hotel rooms following press trips, feeling drained, vulnerable, and emptied. She survived by acting, but it also broke her. In each role I lost aspects of who I was. Acting helped me heal, but it also broke me. As her career flourished, she also assumed a humanitarian persona. She gave her stardom a purpose in 2001, when she was appointed UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador. However, that goal frequently came at a price. She worked on movie sets throughout the day. She adopted children from Cambodia, Ethiopia, and Vietnam while working at night in refugee camps, raising them under the harsh scrutiny of celebrity and the weight of the world. She admitted that she was constantly tired. But for them, I had to keep going. The flaws were more difficult to conceal in later years. Maleficent 2014 was a huge hit, but she came out in 2017 after withdrawing after her well-publicized split from Brad Pitt. I was a raw nerve. I was weak on the inside. I had to recover. She decided to leave Hollywood in order to rebuild herself, be there for her kids, and rediscover peace. She spoke candidly to young artists at the 2025 Palm Springs Film Festival. "This sector can devour you. Take care of what it requires of you." Jolie noted that even with her recent appearances in Eternals 2021 and the upcoming Maria, she still has to pay for each performance. "I had to learn how to breathe again," she remarked. The emotional burden had not diminished with age. It had merely made it deeper. Not every movie was a success. A few were let down. Her decisions were questioned by several. Jolie, however, never pursued the throne. She was searching for purpose. All the characters were confessions. Her reality served as the foundation for every project. She didn't fail because she made mistakes. They were indicators that a woman was not willing to sacrifice her soul. She remained raw and genuine in a society that was fixated on pretense and polish. She didn't make her shadows smaller. She was not phony. She didn't say that she was too much. By doing this, she left a legacy of unwavering bravery rather than perfection. The glitz and glamour of fame are not the focus of her story. It has to do with the price. It tells the story of a woman who bravely walked through the flames and returned with embers for everyone to feel. The ascent of Angelina Jolie was never about celebrity, it was a survival. Spirit was involved. And she reminded us all that in a place like Hollywood, the most radical thing you can be is true through every performance. Scar and silent tear behind the lights. Life presented a storm in the form of a dream, just as Angelina Jolie appeared to be rising from the shadows of her past. Scarred but unharmed. Brad Pitt was the moniker that accompanied it. Their worlds intersected on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith in 2004. A movie that was supposed to be entertaining, but was actually planned to spark something much more explosive. Cinematic chemistry quickly gave way to something visceral, emotional, raw, and dangerously real. Even though Jolie was no stranger to heartbreak, she had started to rebuild herself from the ashes of her previous chaos. And Pitt was still married to Jennifer Aniston at the time. The tabloids let forth a shout. It was ruthless conjecture. However, Jolie remained steadfast in the face of the media frenzy. She wasn't looking for devastation. She was afraid of it. She once claimed, in her own words, "I could never accept having sex with a married guy, when my own father had cheated on my mother. A man who cheats on his wife is not someone I would be attracted to." However, fate is rarely poetic. It is brutal and frequently does not seek consent. It was not a seductive moment that broke down their limits. It was an innocent one. Her young son Maddox looked up at Brad while filming and whispered, "Daddy." Something had changed, Jolie remembered. We both knew just by looking at one another. There was a silent realization that something irrevocable had started, but no dramatic confessions or announcements. A link that was based on recognition, love, longing, and the desperate need to belong to someone who could finally comprehend emerged from that delicate moment. It wasn't only a love story that transpired. It involved building a tribe, a life, and a common heritage. Pitt and Jolie didn't just fall for each other. Their souls were bound to causes, to children, to one another. They brought Shiloh, Knox, and Vivian into the world, traversed refugee camps and conflict zones, and adopted Pax from Vietnam, and Zahara from Ethiopia. Each child was a sacred yet flawed thread in the tapestry they created together. Their 2014 wedding at France's Chateau Miraval was a celebration of intimacy rather than a show of wealth. The kids recited the vows, carried the rings, and assisted with the veil design. It was a hopeful portrait. As a UNHCR ambassador, she speaks for the voiceless, and he restores damaged communities by putting things right. Pitt once said, "They're my blood as much as our biological kids. I can't imagine life without them." The real test of their relationship, however, was not on red carpets or in front of cameras, but rather in the shadows of fear. Jolie courageously decided to have a preventative double mastectomy in 2013 after learning she carried the BRCA1 gene. And Pitt was there for her through every surgery and every spooky night. She later wrote, "We managed to laugh through the darkest nights. In addition to strengthening our bond, we believed it was the best course of action for our family." For an instant, she appeared to have found refuge not in isolation, but in the embrace of a person who understood her grief and stood by her side without flinching. Not every storm, though, roars. Some whispered, and underneath the placid exterior, silent, imperceptible, and unavoidable fissures started to appear. They were viewed as unbreakable by the world. Even ferocious love, however, is not always able to mend what was damaged, long before it started. Later on, Jolie would disclose a reality that was much colder than any headline. A soul that is still troubled by its own past cannot be saved by even the strongest tie. As a result, the storm that had once brought her love gradually reappeared to destroy everything. Nobody could have foreseen how a seemingly routine family vacation would devolve into one of the most significant life turning points for some of Hollywood's most prestigious families. Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie had represented a unique ideal for more than 10 years. 6 kids brought up with love and purpose, humanitarian endeavors that transcended national boundaries, and an international romance. Fractures, however, were becoming deeper behind that glittering facade. Tiny fissures that gradually crumbled beneath the strain of unsaid pain. Then, in September 2016, 30,000 feet above the ground, the idyllic image was destroyed. Legal documents and conflicting accounts continue to obscure what actually transpired on that private jet. The memory, however, is not a headline for Jolie. It's a scar. It wasn't just an argument that happened. A mother's instinctive concern for the safety of her children was a physical shock of anxiety. Years later, her voice was still shaking as she remembered, "I did it for the safety of my family." That moment required sacrifice in addition to strength. She wasn't just abandoning a husband. The only house her kids had ever known was being demolished. The divorce paperwork was made public within days. The storm that followed, however, was invisible to them. A terrible revelation, a fiery court document, and an FBI probe. It was said that during that turmoil, one of their children had been injured. Pitt was not charged, but there was no denying the emotional damage. Once praised for her poise and elegance, the woman was now at the heart of an ongoing custody dispute. She was slowly unraveling herself while desperately protecting her children. Jolie, who had always communicated through movement, remained silent until she was unable to do so. She eventually remarked, her words tinged with controlled agony. Some have exploited my silence, but my children know the truth. A courtroom was never truly the focus of her struggle. It concerned a house that had become a memory. There was now only silence in the kitchen where pancakes were being made. Once echoing through the corridors, the laughing had now become silent. Jolie started to clearly wane. Her weight loss, sunken cheeks, and diminished sparkle in her eyes were all visible to the public. The toll was felt by her body. High blood pressure, a spirit weighed down by grief, and partial facial paralysis. However, Jolie never became resentful even as her world fell apart. She turned inside to protect, not to shatter. She became indestructible for her children. And on that trip, where most people witnessed scandal, a woman forged by destruction, illuminated by love, and immortalized by perseverance, was born not just an ending, but a beginning. She didn't leave in a helpless manner. She entered the flames and came out with a purpose, albeit not without suffering. It wasn't a fall. It was grace reconstructed from ashes, characterized by the unwavering, passionate love she gave without ceasing, rather than by what she lost. The outcome was more than just a divorce. For almost 10 years, it would be a furnace of anguish, quiet, and fortitude. When Jolie filed for divorce in 2016, the entire world gasped. But it wasn't scandal to her. It was essential. In a rare moment of emotion, she would later confess, "It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I didn't do it lightly." Jolie became the silent force, preparing herself for the storms of a war she didn't want but had to fight. "I did it for the well-being of my family." Pitt brought their private anguish into the public eye by pursuing joint custody, which sparked an 8-year judicial battle. Headlines merged with courtrooms. Jolie didn't say much, but what she did say was heavy and crystalline. "For years I had kept quiet because I wanted my kids to get better. However, tranquility isn't necessarily implied by silence." Jolie endured it alone, researching herself for her kids' benefit, while the media analyzed every affidavit and every rumored leak. They then started to carve out their own truths. After seeing that tragic flight, Maddox, the oldest, apparently decided to break off his relationship with Pitt. With quiet determination, Pax followed. In what was arguably the most symbolic step, Shiloh, the golden child of the Jolie-Pitt lineage, asked to have her father's last name removed on her 18th birthday. Sahara, who formerly stood proudly as a symbol of togetherness, also deleted Pitt from her college records. These were not spontaneous actions. They were subdued echoes of suffering, not rebellion but affirmation. Angelina never acted out in public during it all. She never started a campaign to clear her name or released a tell-all. She persevered. "Some have exploited my silence, but my kids know the truth. And that's enough for me," she said. Years of discussions in court were overshadowed by that one sentence. Because obtaining custody was not the goal of Jolie's battle. When all else was crumbling, it was about keeping her kids together. She created a new kind of power out of that stillness. In presence, not in acclaim. The quote that became her compass, her weapon, and her legacy was, "My strength came from the love I had to give, not from the love I was given." She didn't only make it through every night marred by tears and every private prayer. She silently and fiercely carried them all, with the unbreakable devotion of a mother. This battle wasn't something Jolie requested. However, she handled it with honor and the unwavering grace of someone who understands that sometimes the greatest triumph is just continuing to love in the face of loss. The emotional scars Angelina Jolie carried did not simply linger as the years passed in the quiet that followed her tragic breakup. Like a slowly spreading poison, they started to appear in her body. Once admired for her unwavering spirit and dominating grace, the woman was slowly falling apart, not with drama, but with silent decay. Once the appearance of red carpet elegance and cinematic force began to give way, her body began to give way beneath the unseen weight of anguish. She was diagnosed with hypertension shortly after her separation, a disease exacerbated by stress and grief itself. Then came Bell's palsy, a vicious neurological twist that paralyzed half of her face, as if the weight of quiet could no longer be carried by even her own body. The public, so accustomed to her strength, never saw the tremors in her hands, the loneliness in her shoulders, the exhaustion she carried behind closed doors. Jolie would later whisper in an interview, "I didn't recognize myself anymore. I had disappeared into someone tiny, faded, and aching." The woman in the mirror looked like a ghost of what the world once idolized. Her once brilliant eyes now shadowed, her features pulled by paralysis, her glow muted by years of emotional attrition. It was starting to break, though, and just when everyone thought she had had enough, she made a decision that would change her life not just as a woman, but as a mother fighting to keep her life together for her kids. In 2013, Jolie made a choice that made headlines around the world, not as a celebrity headline, but as a cry for survival. Her decision to have a preventive double mastectomy after discovering she had the BRCA1 gene mutation, which put her at an alarming 87% risk of breast cancer, devastated her not out of vanity, but because it meant losing aspects of herself she had known since childhood. But she didn't stop there. In her painfully honest opinion piece, she stated, "I want my kids to see a strong mother, not someone afraid." In 2015, she decided to have her ovaries and fallopian tubes removed, ending her chances of becoming pregnant again, but beginning a new one that would lead to longevity and presence for her children. The world praised her bravery, but praise does not take away grief. And behind the headlines, Jolie was mourning not only what she had lost, but also what those losses meant. They were acts of unadulterated devotion, the kind that few comprehend until they are asked to exchange parts of their own body for the promise of more time. She once said, "The coldness people sense in me now is not who I am, it's the skin I had to grow to survive." That coldness wasn't apathy, it was protection. During those years, Jolie not only became an icon, but also a lighthouse, standing still in her pain so others could find their way through theirs. The quiet war against her sense of self had entered a brutal phase. Her femininity was challenged, her reflection changed, and her internal landscape was permanently altered. Although she had medical scars on her body, those scars became symbols of love rather than loss, and her candor sparked a global conversation about DNA testing, cancer prevention, and the silent, sacred bravery it takes to put your children's future ahead of your own worries. This brutal, unvarnished honesty is what makes Jolie unforgettable, even though the world will always remember her for her beauty. Because what she went through was not just a physical transformation, but a spiritual one. And by surviving it, she became more than resilient, she became eternal. After everything she went through, she could have quietly faded into solitude and vanished from public view. She now lives in a legendary estate in Los Feliz, Los Angeles, which is ironically close to Brad Pitt's house. The nearly 7,500 square foot mansion, which has 6 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms, a tranquil rose garden, and a soundless pool, is less of a fortress than a sanctuary undergoing transformation. But what really defines this new chapter isn't architecture. Angelina Jolie, however, made the decision to live with intention, to rebuild with purpose, and to continue with a fire only born from survival. Maddox and Pax support her humanitarian work from a distance, with Maddox studying in South Korea and Pax purposefully avoiding Pitt's story. Zahara thrives at Spelman College with resolute independence. Jolie's world now centers around her children, each of whom carries fragments of her resilience. Financially, Jolie, who is estimated to be worth between $120 million and $160 million, invests her wealth in her children's future and worthwhile endeavors. Shiloh, who shed Pitt from her name, now works with her mother on Broadway's The Outsiders, creatively joined by the youngest, Vivian Knox. Her health, once ravaged by grief, has improved through meditation, clean eating, yoga, and disciplined wellness routines. She sold her stake in Chateau Miraval, opting instead to invest in people, purpose, and peace. But beneath it all is a quiet ache that lingers. Her goal is to protect fragile serenity, not to regain youth. Even though there is now peace, the memory of pain lingers, occasionally waking up in the middle of the night, a pulse beneath her serene exterior. Angelina Jolie has experienced one of the most significant artistic transformations in contemporary film, not just from actress to director, but also from muse to mission. She is no longer just a face on screen, she is the conscience behind it. Jolie's work on the Broadway adaptation of The Outsiders, a story steeped in rebellion and self-discovery, and the biopic of Maria Callas, a woman torn between genius and tragedy, are not arbitrary decisions. Rather, they are reflections of her own emotional landscape. As a producer and director, Jolie now curates stories that speak to the soul. Tales of survival, identity, and transformation. While she may not command the screen as often, the depth of her impact behind it has only grown. Jolie did not speak like a celebrity when she addressed the 2025 Youth Summit as a UN Special Envoy. These projects are more about echo than entertainment. Echoes of resilience, of reclaiming lost voices, of defying the narratives that have been forced upon us. Public appearances have become rare for her, but they are never hollow. They are always tied to her children's milestones or international humanitarian causes. Her words, delivered not with grandeur, but with quiet conviction, resonated like scripture to a generation lost in noise. She spoke as if she had bled for her beliefs, who had carried loss in her bones, and who now channels that weight into purpose. Never to be arrogant. The wisdom of every scar, every heartache, and every night she stayed up to ensure her kids felt protected is contained in that one sentence. She is no longer interested in making headlines. Meaning is what she lives for. And Jolie's flame is more intense than ever in this silence, in this inner light. Even now, though, the shadows occasionally reappear during times of seclusion, to remind her of what she survived, not to eat her. The specter of the mirror where a stranger was once reflected, the phantom agony of a body transformed by pain that was required, the unseen burden of decisions made out of intense protection, rather than fear. Jolie has learnt to wear it all as a badge, rather than a burden. Although her current life is peaceful, it is full of depth. Her care for her family is what leaves a lasting legacy, not her red carpet performances. The lives she affects, and the tales she decides to share without ever asking for recognition. Her fame and attractiveness are not her greatest gifts to the world, but her humanity. A reminder that a life ravaged by loss can nevertheless blossom into something meaningful. That a lady who has suffered a great deal can still succeed. It's because of the pain, not despite it. At one point, she thought, I thought I had lost everything. However, I learned how to love myself again for my kids. And in that gentle, hard-won, and holy lesson, she not only survived but also served as a beacon for others. A healer who discovered how to cure not only her own heart, but also the hearts of everyone who is silently observing. We would be delighted to hear from you now. Has your life been impacted by Angelina Jolie's story? Has her experience changed your perspective on suffering, recovery, or the strength of motherhood? Your voice counts, so please share your ideas in the comments section. Additionally, remember to like, share, and subscribe if the story touched you. There are still unknown tales of remarkable personalities to be unearthed.